A 1910 family portrait hides an impossible detail at first glance. Dr. Margaret Whitfield adjusted her reading glasses as she examined the donation pile at the Yorkshire Historical Society. Rain drummed against the Victorian windows of the old manor house that served as their archive. Among dusty books and faded documents, a single photograph caught her attention, a formal family portrait from 1910. The sepia-toned image showed the prestigious Harrington family posed in their grand drawing room. Lord Edmund Harrington stood behind his seated wife, Lady Catherine, while their 3 children, twins Edward and Eleanor, aged 12, and young William, barely 8, were arranged formally beside them. The photograph appeared unremarkable at first. Typical Edwardian formality, expensive clothing and the stiff poses expected of the era. But something nagged at Margaret's trained historian's eye. She pulled out her magnifying glass and leaned closer. Her breath caught in her throat as she focused on young William's hand, which rested casually on a small table beside his chair. What she saw should have been impossible. In the child's palm lay an object that wouldn't be invented for another 15 years. Margaret's hands trembled as she set down the magnifying glass, her mind racing with questions that challenged everything she knew about photographic history. Margaret's heart pounded as she examined the photograph under the archive's high-powered desk lamp. The detail was unmistakable. Young William Harrington held what appeared to be a small, rectangular device with a dark screen and metallic frame. The object's sleek design and proportions were eerily familiar, resembling something that wouldn't exist until decades later. She immediately called her colleague, Professor James Crawford, a photography expert from Cambridge University. "James, I need you to see something extraordinary," she said, her voice barely concealing her excitement. Within hours, James arrived at the archive, his grey beard damp from the persistent Yorkshire drizzle. He studied the photograph with his professional loupe, his expression growing increasingly perplexed. "The photographic paper is authentic," he murmured, running his fingers along the edges. "The developing process, the chemical composition, everything screams 1910. But this object," he pointed to William's hand, "it's impossible. The proportions, the design aesthetics, it looks almost like a smartphone." Margaret finished quietly. James nodded grimly. "But that's absurd. The first mobile phone wasn't invented until 1973, and smartphones didn't exist until the 1990s. There must be a logical explanation." They stared at the photograph in stunned silence, both researchers knowing they'd stumbled upon something that challenged the very foundations of technological history. Margaret spent the following morning in the Yorkshire County Records Office searching for information about the Harrington family. The Gothic Revival building's reading room felt appropriately atmospheric as she sifted through birth certificates, property deeds, and newspaper clippings. Lord Edmund Harrington had been a wealthy industrialist, owner of several textile mills across Yorkshire. His wife, Lady Catherine, came from old Scottish aristocracy. The family had lived at Thornfield Manor, a sprawling estate near Harrogate, until it was sold in 1923, but it was young William who captured her attention. Unlike his siblings, who followed conventional paths, Edward inherited the mills, Eleanor married into nobility, William's life seemed shrouded in mystery. School records showed he was exceptionally gifted in mathematics and natural sciences, far beyond his years. A 1915 obituary caught her eye. Master William Harrington, aged 13, died tragically in a laboratory accident at the family estate. The brilliant young scholar had been conducting private experiments under the tutelage of renowned physicist Dr. Heinrich Steinberg. Margaret's pulse quickened. Dr. Steinberg. She recognized the name from her research into early 20th century scientific innovation. He was a German physicist who'd fled to England in 1909, supposedly working on theoretical research. But what kind of experiments could a 13-year-old boy have been conducting? The mystery was deepening rather than resolving. Determined to uncover the truth, Margaret drove through the winding Yorkshire countryside to find the former Thornfield Manor. The November sky hung low and grey, typical of northern England's brooding weather. After several wrong turns down narrow lanes bordered by stone walls, she found the estate. The manor had been converted into luxury apartments, but the current owner, Mrs. Patricia Goldsmith, was delighted to meet a historian interested in the property's past. A sprightly woman in her 70s, she led Margaret through the grand entrance hall, pointing out original Victorian features. "There's something rather odd in the basement," Patricia mentioned casually as they toured the ground floor. The developers found a sealed room in 1987 during renovations, We've used it for storage ever since." Margaret's heart raced. Could I see it? The basement room was hidden behind a false wall, accessible only through a narrow passage. Inside, Margaret's flashlight revealed remnants of what appeared to be a sophisticated laboratory: brass instruments, glass vessels, and stacks of notebooks covered in dust. But most intriguing were the electrical components: wires, small metal plates, and devices that seemed far too advanced for 1910. On a workbench sat a leather-bound journal. Margaret opened it carefully, revealing pages filled with detailed diagrams and notes written in a child's careful handwriting signed W. Harrington, 1910. Back at the archives, Margaret carefully photographed each page of William's journal before beginning her translation. The boy had written in a mixture of English and German, clearly influenced by his tutor, Dr. Steinberg. What she discovered left her speechless. The journal detailed experiments in electromagnetic theory and wireless communication, far beyond the scientific understanding of 1910. William had been working on something he called temporal frequency manipulation, attempting to receive signals from future time periods. One entry, dated September 15, 1910, read, "Success at last." The device resonated at 2.4 gigahertz and received clear signals. The transmission showed moving pictures of people holding rectangular devices, touching them with their fingers to make them respond. Dr. Steinberg says, "I've achieved something impossible: communication across time itself." Another entry described the construction of a temporal receiver, a small device designed to capture and display these future transmissions. The diagrams showed a rectangular object with a dark screen, eerily similar to what appeared in the family photograph. Margaret's hands shook as she read William's final entry, dated October 3, 1910. "I can see their world clearly now. People in the year 2010 carry these devices everywhere. They can speak to anyone, anywhere in the world. I have built one that works, but Dr. Steinberg warns that revealing this technology too early could change the course of history. We must be careful." Margaret's research into Dr. Heinrich Steinberg revealed a brilliant but controversial figure. Born in Berlin in 1864, he'd studied under Max Planck and had been working on theoretical physics that wouldn't be mainstream for decades. His sudden departure from Germany in 1909 had been attributed to political disagreements, but Margaret suspected there was more to the story. She found his immigration records at the National Archives in London. Steinberg had arrived in England, claiming to be researching temporal mechanics, a field that didn't officially exist. Lord Harrington had sponsored his residency, apparently fascinated by the physicist's unconventional theories. A letter in the Harrington family papers provided crucial insight. Written by Steinberg to Lord Harrington in October 1910, it read, "My Lord, I must express my grave concerns about young William's progress. His natural abilities far exceed my expectations, but I fear we are treading on dangerous ground. The boy has successfully constructed a device capable of receiving electromagnetic signals from future time periods. While this represents an unprecedented scientific achievement, I worry about the implications. Knowledge gained too early could disrupt the natural progression of human development. I strongly recommend we cease these experiments immediately." The letter was never sent. Margaret found it among Steinberg's personal effects, which had been donated to the archives years earlier. A red stamp across the top read, "Confidential Government Seizure 1915. Margaret's discovery of the government seizure stamp led her down a new path of investigation. She contacted Dr. Sarah Chen, a colleague who specialized in declassified government documents. Within days, Sarah had uncovered a file that had been sealed for over a century. The documents revealed that after William's death in 1915, British intelligence had quietly confiscated all of Dr. Steinberg's research. The physicist himself had been detained under the Defense of the Realm Act and later deported to neutral Switzerland, where he lived in obscurity until his death in 1943. A memo from Colonel Reginald Ashworth, head of the newly formed Intelligence Division, stated, "The Harrington-Steinberg experiments represent a potential threat to national security. The boy's device appears to function as claimed, receiving transmissions from an undetermined future date. This technology must not fall into enemy hands, nor should it be developed further until Britain can fully understand its implications." The file included photographs of William's laboratory and his temporal receiver. Margaret compared these images to the family portrait. They were identical. The device in young William's hand was indeed his own invention, a primitive but functional communication device that could somehow connect to the far future. But the most shocking revelation came in the final document. William's death had not been an accident. He had been deliberately poisoned to prevent his knowledge from spreading, making him perhaps history's youngest victim of government secrecy. The classified documents painted a tragic picture of a brilliant child caught in the crossfire of scientific advancement and political paranoia. William Harrington had not died in a laboratory accident. He had been murdered by his own government to protect a secret that could have changed the world. Dr. Steinberg's final report, written just before his detention, described William's last days. The boy grows more excited with each successful transmission. He speaks of showing his family the wonders of the future world, of demonstrating how humanity will communicate across vast distances through these miraculous devices. I have tried to impress upon him the need for secrecy, but his enthusiasm is that of a child who has discovered magic. The family portrait, Margaret realized, had been taken just days before William's death. In his innocent excitement, he had brought his temporal receiver to the formal sitting, holding it like a treasured toy. His parents, likely unaware of its true nature, had simply seen another of their son's curious inventions. Margaret found one final document, a letter from Lady Catherine Harrington to her sister, dated November 1915. "We buried dear William yesterday. The official cause was listed as chemical poisoning from his experiments, but I cannot shake the feeling that more was involved. Strange men came to the house after his death, removing all his equipment and papers. They spoke of national security and made us sign papers promising never to discuss William's work. My heart is broken not just by his loss, but by the mystery surrounding it." As Margaret pieced together William's story, she realized the profound irony of the situation. A boy genius from 1910 had invented technology remarkably similar to devices that would become commonplace a century later. His temporal receiver, primitive though it was, had successfully bridged the gap between past and future. She arranged to meet with Dr. Emma Rodriguez, a quantum physicist from Oxford, who specialized in theoretical time mechanics. Emma examined the photographs and journal entries with growing excitement. "What this boy achieved is theoretically possible," Emma explained over coffee in Oxford's historic Eagle and Child pub. "Quantum entanglement suggests that information can indeed transcend normal temporal boundaries under specific electromagnetic conditions. If he somehow created the right resonant frequency, he could have established a connection with future quantum states." Margaret showed her the final photograph, the family portrait with William holding his impossible device. "So this could actually be legitimate." "More than legitimate," Emma replied. "It's revolutionary. This boy didn't just invent an early form of smartphone, he created the world's first time communication device. The fact that modern smartphones operate on similar frequencies isn't coincidence. William may have unknowingly established a quantum bridge that influenced the development of future technology." They sat in stunned silence, contemplating the implications. William Harrington hadn't just predicted the future, he had somehow helped create it, his childhood invention echoing across time to inspire the very devices people carried today. 6 months after her discovery, Margaret stood in the restored Thornfield Manor, now home to the William Harrington Memorial Foundation for Young Scientists. The basement laboratory had been carefully reconstructed as a museum, and William's story was finally being told to the world. The family portrait hung in the place of honor, no longer hiding its secret, but celebrating it. Visitors could now see what Margaret had discovered. The rectangular device in William's hand, explained by detailed plaques describing his remarkable achievements and tragic fate. Lady Catherine's great-granddaughter, Jessica Harrington, had traveled from Edinburgh for the opening ceremony. "We always knew William was special," she said, tears in her eyes as she looked at the portrait, "but we never imagined how special. Great-grandmother used to say he was a boy who lived in tomorrow." Dr. Steinberg was posthumously honored alongside William, his warnings about premature technological revelation having proven tragically prescient. The foundation now funded young inventors while emphasizing the ethical responsibilities that come with breakthrough discoveries. As Margaret addressed the gathered crowd of scientists, historians, and schoolchildren, she reflected on the journey from that rainy Yorkshire morning to this moment of recognition. William Harrington teaches us that genius can emerge at any age, in any era. His temporal receiver reminds us that the boundaries between past and future are more fluid than we imagine. The impossible detail in the 1910 photograph was no longer impossible. It was proof that human ingenuity transcends time itself.